Welcome to Forge in the Field today. Today's going to be a solo cast. In ag today, what we're starting to see is a shift in how the world is viewing manure. When we started Crop Fertility Services in 2012, it was hard to find enough people to take it for a multitude of reasons, right? There was too many weed seeds and chicken manure. And I found this ironic because I'm organic and I have to use either mechanical or hand pulling to get rid of the weed seeds. And I used it all the time. And conventional guys can spray it very effectively. But that was a limiting belief on why you wouldn't apply manure. And it's really been misunderstood in a world where we are used to supplement type fertilizers, right? You have the co-ops and you say, hey, you have your macronutrients, NPK. We're going to give you this dose. And there's an irony there in that the person making your recommendations also happens to be the salesperson writing your prescription. So it's a little like pharmaceutical companies writing your prescription, right? And it's not that I don't think that there's people that are good at what they do and make the correct prescriptions, but it just puts an interesting spot of, if their need was 120 and you sold them an extra 15%, they might end up with 150 pounds of N or whatever the product is. And you can open up your sales margin by so much by just slightly over recommending. Another thing about manure is it's heavily regulated. To even start this company, one of the reasons that we were able to start it was the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the USDA. We have to be a certified commercial waste technician. And there's a whole set of rules that go with manure. And obviously, somebody ruined it for everybody. That's all new laws, all new regulation is because somebody overdid something or, didn't respect something there. And so the state has a base level of requirements. There's actually a federal level. If there is an animal operation over 300 animal units, so all these chickens, cows, pigs, basically per weight of the animal is a unit. So they can say, hey, you'll produce this much manure per animal unit. And then they say, okay, if you're over so many units, you're now on the federal level of regulation. And every ton of manure that leaves the farm needs to be documented, where it went, how much, when it was applied, what method of tillage was put into place, and what the analysis was. The state requires you to get an annual analysis, and every 3 years you have to do a soil sample of that field that you're applying the manure. A lot of paperwork to handle manure. Not so much required for synthetic. So it's an interesting market because, well, one, it stinks, literally, and it's a high volume product. So to get a full application rate for my crops might take me 6,000 to 8,000 pounds an acre. And if I use conventional, I probably need 400 total of a mix. Manure comes mixed, pre-mixed. We don't get to choose what's in that blend. And synthetic, or even mined, right? I don't want to just say it's all synthetic. But you can dial that in precisely however you want till you get the exact blend you need across your field. And manure isn't that way because we're just getting a raw product. So anyways, to start the business, I have to get certified by the state of Minnesota. It's a commercial animal waste technician. And we have to start finding customers that are willing to take the product, and then we have to apply it, right? So now there's another charge of freight. And when I go back to saying like volume per acre, right? Thousands, hundreds, there's a lot of logistics that go into all this because you end up hauling semi-loads more of product. Like per 80, you might need 5 semi-loads instead of 1. And every time that tire is rolling down the road carrying a load, it costs dollars. Not only that, but then you get an application cost. And these application windows are spring and fall, right? It's not a lawn mowing service that happens all summer long every week. You are operating these machines wide open for probably 8 to 10 weeks in the fall and about 6 weeks in the spring. Less people want it in the spring because there's compaction. In the fall, you got a winter coming, freeze thaw, you're going to break it, a lot of that compaction up. And so we had to learn a lot about markets, sales cycles. One of the nice things about agriculture is every year, no matter what the market, people have to plant crops. So there's always a market there versus, say, construction. If there's a downturn, nobody's doing anything, and at least not much. But every year, farmers will have to choose what they're going to use for fertility. And on years like this, they might do just bare bones minimum. And one thing we've started talking to these guys about is instead of, if you're conventional, hey, instead of doing a full rate, instead of that 6,000 to 8,000 pounds an acre, 3 to 4 tons, what if you do a 1 to 2 ton rate? We can actually variable rate that too, by the way. We track analysis. So the state requires 1 per year. We're doing 26 per different site, right? Every other week we're getting a sample because we want to know exactly how this manure goes. And so we're convincing, or we're educating conventional guys how to take a small amount of tons or I got to start sober. So we've really shifted into educating conventional guys about, hey, instead of doing a full rate of manure, you can still get a tremendous yield bump by putting on 1 to 2 tons an acre as your base rate and just filling in based on what your needs still are. Because then you're still getting things like organic matter, soil or biology for the soil, carbon, micronutrients. Those are just things that are there that you'll never get unless you pay for with synthetic. And it's not truly nutrients that came out of the gut of an animal. Oh, geez. So it's been an interesting journey because when we started all this, one of the things that I learned, or I thought at first, was we had a silver bullet with chicken manure, that this is just the greatest thing. When we started CFS, we were hauling chicken manure in from Michigan, the manure pellets, $200 a ton, putting on 800 pounds an acre, which rough math says 60 to 80 pounds of N. And we were trying to scratch our heads, trying to figure out why can't we grow 150 bushel corn? We're not even, we're hitting 60, 70 bushel corn. And when this opportunity came up, our fertility costs plummeted and we were able to put on full applications. And just like that, overnight, we hit, 160 bushel corn. And when all this started, I didn't know what NPK was. I knew N was for nitrogen, but golly, P and K, one of them's phosphorus, one of them's potassium. But which is which? I don't know. And what do they do? I don't know. And so what I really picked up on was after applying chicken manure for the years, and you'll find this manure is kind of an interesting, I don't know if I say kind of, manure is a fascinating product. And I'll tell you why. So we have how many different types of chicken barns? We have the old style chicken barns, which everything drops down into a pit. And that will give us our highest moisture, lowest quality manure. And then we have the newer style barns, which produce a drier, higher value manure, has higher nutrients in it. And then these newer cage-free designs have a lot more air, a lot less bird density, and you get manure that has over 100 pounds of nitrogen per ton in it. And we have an agreement that ties it to the fertilizer price market. So when there's a bump, like we have a war going on for fertilizer, our price goes up too. And it just to match what happens, because we had a situation where one of the farms we were buying from felt like they were being shorted when everything went way up. And so that was our solution, was let's tie it to the market, and then it is what it is. But yeah, manure is fat. Layer manure. You're going to find that there's a lot of extra calcium in it. So I haven't needed to put any lime down on my ground since I started farming it. And my pH has only been climbing. In fact, the phosphorus has been too. And so I'm going to have to be mindful to put in some forage or grazing or crops like that I can take product off and get my phos numbers down. But I don't have to pay for liming because there's a lot of calcium, and the calcium is what opens your ground up and makes it more fluffy and neutralizes your pH. Synthetic fertilizer is going to draw that number down over time, your pH. And then you move to like products like turkey litter. Because they aren't growing eggs, think of calcium for the eggshell. Turkey litter is going to be a lot lower in manure. And then there's bed shavings. So you have manure, and then so nitrogen in manure, first job for nitrogen is start breaking things down. If you ever see ground that has old corn stalks, it has just trash that hasn't broken down, the odds are there's not much for microbial activity, and nitrogen is one of the feeders for that. So nitrogen will feed the bugs that go and they start breaking all this down. So take that, you have chicken manure, which does not have bedding. So you apply that manure, it gets in the ground. Manure is going to release long over time. It's, urea is going to be more of a flash. It's going to be a shorter window. University studies show that chicken manure is a 70, 80, 90, meaning N, first year availability, P, 80%, K, 90 for the first year availability for plant. What we've found is that if you take manure from those older style pit barns, your ammonia content in the manure analysis is going to be high, and you have a risk of that flashing off. There's no bedding, there's no nothing in here to hold that. So that's going to be more likely to flash off. There's an organic state and an inorganic state of nitrogen. Simply put, if it's in an organic state, it's locked up. It's doing its job. It's converting some carbon. It's doing something where it is not plant available. As soon as it's inorganic, it can do one of three things. It can go up in the air, volatilize. Our air is 78% nitrogen. It can go leach down on the ground if we get a heavy rain event, or be pulled up by the plant, right? It's free, so it's gonna move somewhere. And I guess the fourth option would be is if something else that comes in contact with it can jump back in the cycle and become inorganic or organic again. And so you take turkey manure, Now that has bedding in it. So litter is actually a manure that has a bedding in it. Learned that recently, actually. So manure has, the litter has shavings, and the availability is actually going to be less because you spread that out. That manure is going to be clinging to bedding, and its first job is to do what? It's to break down the bedding. So once the bedding is broken down and that job's completed, now that nitrogen can become available for plant use. And so they say, maybe it's 60% the first year. We found out that if we pelletize chicken manure, we're closer to 85%. We haven't really figured out why, but just more nitrogen more nitrogen becomes available after being pressed through that process of being turned into a pellet. Let's see. Okay, so more on manure. So each manure is going to have a different digestive tract, a different diet, right? So think of a system. You harvest. Let's use farming references, right? So you're going to take the combine. You're going to harvest soybeans, right? So your head's going to pick up all the soybeans, and it's keeping the good stuff up in the hopper. We'll call that the meat or the eggs or the byproduct or the main product. And it's going to throw the trash out the back, the manure. Based on whatever crop you're combining, the crop coming out the back or the trash is going to change. So turkeys are going to have a different diet than chickens. Cows are going to have a different diet than those animals. And pigs, so we can have beef pack. That's going to be a dried solid. That's actually the two categories of manure, is liquid or solid. But the three solid types that are bulk are going to be that poultry and cattle. You're going to have a ton of fiber, a ton of carbon coming out of the backside of a cattle because they're ruminant and they have 4 stomachs. And with the 4 stomachs, they need to have roughage or fiber to digest and break down. I remember learning in elementary school, actually, that if you put, say, like molasses on paper, you could feed it to a cow and they would get something out of it because their stomachs can digest all of that fiber. And it's the same thing for plants. Cows can get much more out of the complicated lignin strands that the fibers would pass through our body because we're monogastric. But they can completely get anything available out of that. They don't take it all, though. And whatever isn't goes out the back. And they have a very different microbiome than chickens do, than poultry does, turkeys. And so that alone is going to put a different, think of bugs in a jug. That's going to put a whole different, think of kombucha for the soil, right? Whatever is in microbiology is in there is going to now go in your soil. And that is where you can really start to turn soil health with any of these manures very differently. But you can start taking all this manure, putting it in your ground, and you will have benefits that are very difficult to measure on the Y, but yet you'll see it on the yield monitor. For instance, for Crop Fertility Services, in the organic world, there's just a ton of things that were coming at us. And I think it's all farmers, actually, right? There's just snake oils galore out there. And we wanted to be a proofer of them. So if we were going to sell you something, we understood it and that it worked, and we could tell you why and when not to use it. And no product is guaranteed to work every single year. But our goal was, hey, 4 out of 5 years, you get a result that at least pays you for your investment and your time. Ideally, though, like not working for free, let's say it has a larger benefit than that. So we tried to use some bugs in a jug. This one is called, I probably shouldn't use the name. We bought a biological product that was OMRI approved, and we put it in liquid in furrow with the planter, and there was no difference. And they have all these university studies. In fact, it even shows up in Beck's PFR as something that's proven to work. But we couldn't get it to work on our field. And I actually sold it to a conventional neighbor, and he saw an improvement. And my only logical conclusion is we already have a rich biological, we already have a rich microbial environment in the soil. So pouring that on actually doesn't bring any benefit when it's all, the homes are already full, right? It's already got a great thriving microbial life in the soil. So the benefit isn't there versus somebody who hasn't been using this and doesn't have all that activity and they have homes for it, it can be put to use. So I actually ended up having this conversation with a friend of mine who farms, and he actually had the same conclusion. I didn't know he was running the same test I was at the same time. And he said, I saw zero difference from that product, but my neighbors who are conventional were raving about it. And so I found that interesting that we're 250 miles apart or 200 miles apart and we're seeing the same thing. So yeah, manure has a lot of things that aren't measured in today's ag world of supplement, right? NPK, your macros, sulfur for a micro, maybe boron. Manure, though we can't, well, we're working on fractionalizing it. But though manure is just a product that's made by animals, and we don't get to control the NPK rates in it. So that being said, we're kind of stuck with applying whatever came out of the animal. Just that we can variable rate that, but that is what the mix will be across the ground. And that can be a benefit though, right? So if we're going to over apply phosphorus for, say, what the corn crop needs, you'll have it next year for the soybeans, right? So going back to educating our conventional guys, you're putting stuff on that can be there for a couple of years. But the co-ops, we're measuring that 1 year at a time. So that's a little bit about the fascinating world of manure. Okay, so some of the things that you're going to see when you apply manure is you're going to have green later in the season. We'll just use corn as our subject here. But you're going to have green longer, right? The corn is going to be holding that nitrogen because it's slow release through the process. Heavier test weight. So one of the things that happens when you enrich in your soil microbiome, if you will, or the microbial life, is the roots need relationships with different types of microbiology to draw up different types of nutrients. And if you have a system that just feeds NPK, you're going to have a set of nutrient or you're going to have a set of microbial relationships that's really efficient at getting those three things up into the plant. But when you apply manure, you're creating a lot of different relationships. You're giving roots access to more nutrients. You're going to create a healthier crop, for one. So you talk about disease resistance, standability, and even in the dry years, it's going to have more access to water because the roots have grown more. And the ground actually can hold a little more water as well because of the carbon and the organic matter you've put in. Heavier test weight grain is another thing. Now, so heavier test weight grain is another thing. Now, the one thing that we're working on pushing and measuring and understanding better is nutrient density. When you have all those relationships underground, pulling all those different nutrients up into the plant, you've begun to change everything after that, meaning that plant is now healthier. It's got more disease resistance, more drought resistance. There's more pest resistant. It's not going to be as attractive to bugs when they're plants have a stress hormone that actually attracts insects to it. Example actually is grass. You love the smell of grass when it's cut. That's a stress hormone that it's putting out. That's actually to try repel some of the insects, but we think it smells good. But so those plants will be less attractive to pests. And then the grain that they produce is healthier. They're going to have a more, variety still plays a key in some of this, but they're going to have a more nutrient dense grain, which then, say if you feed that grain to livestock, chickens, whatever it is, the cycle keeps going. It keeps feeding the other animals, eventually, inevitably, into food that we eat. And it all starts here, right at the root. And though that market doesn't pay anything more today, you should see a yield bump. And the lasting, probably 2 to 3 years, you'll see something there from just an application. And a lot of people aren't sure how to measure this because nobody's taught farmers how to understand the math on this. Yes, the price is more, but the product is not even. And one of the things that still sits with me is, and I grew up on a dairy farm, but even at my neighbor's house, we were talking, 25 years later, after they sold the cows, they still have a piece of ground that will consistently stay green longer, out yield the rest, because it was closest to the barn for the wintertime when they had to spread manure, when it had to go and it was 20 below and you're on an open cab tractor. You're not driving down the road. And so that one piece of ground got probably 50 times the manure than other pieces, and it still shows today 25 years later. Yeah, we've had a few customers call, and sometimes we're not shy to remind our customers either. We've had guys notice that the ground gets softer on their side. And I'd say on their side of the fence row, there's a line where the ground feels different. The crop is more green. Hey, John, driving by your field, I noticed that one's a lot darker green than your neighbor's. What's different? Getting this time of year, tassels are popping out. The plant is demanding a ton of nitrogen, and it still got it because of despite all the rainfall, the manure is still converting the nitrogen out of that cycle. And we have other products like eggshells too that release slowly over time, and like 3 years. And so the pH just kind of steadily keeps climbing, and some of the same results. It seems that they're just, if you can look down the fence line to your neighbor's field to this one, there's years where there's a definite, it's better over here. And I would say it's rare that it's the opposite way. That straight conventional synthetic fertilizer is going to look better than a field with a partial or full application of manure. It's no accident how these products came to be. When I was talking to Gilbert, one of the owners of Prairie Hybrids, and he said something that was rather profound. He said, if you stop looking at the world as some big accident we have to discover how it was made, and you look at it from the lens of this was a system that God designed, and it's all designed with intention, you can see things differently. That being said, it is not a coincidence that manure is this kombucha for the soil, that it's got so much more capabilities than what we've kind of demonized it to be, this stinky pile of dung. It's actually got a ton of benefit, and it will help regrow. It is a full circle all the way around. And just that alone is quite an amazing thing.
I love this last part. This is money. Um,
Yeah.
as a complete outsider, you're describing right now the benefits and like why now it just all like makes sense. Oh, this is why. Um, yeah, I don't know how educated farmers are on the chemistry of the soil, which I don't think is bad that you got into it so granularly in the front half because it shows that you're very educated in that you know arena. But I can actually understand what you're talking about now, which is pretty cool.
So, you know, I don't know if it's this episode, maybe it's another one, but we talk about where fertilizer came in and the process of what got us to where we are today with manure. I think it'd be interesting to do an episode on that, and I think it'd be good for me to learn it. I don't have enough info, I feel like, to give quality content on it today, but I do know, like in the early, late 1800s, early 1900s, we started producing fertilizer. But actually, before that, we were using like, you ever heard of Mammoth Caves? So that's in Kentucky. Great place to bring your family if you want to go there and then check out the Ark Encounter. But Mammoth Caves was actually a fertilizer mine at first. Today it's a national park, but from all the bat guano, they were getting fertilizer off of that and turning it into something. And so this is not a new conversation by any means. We've been doing this for a long time, but we just have driven so far down the supplement road that I think there's a big turn coming where we're going to be heading back to closing. You know, what actually happened was we fractured the animal crop circle, the loop. We cracked open the loop, and as fertilizer came and as progression happened and progress, and the big wheat runs out in the Dakotas here, and these ag booms, we found that we could have more control easier by just applying a granular product, not measuring the quality change, of course, but the yield, which is another conversation, is that we're built on yield. Um, but not measuring the quality change, creating an industry to help us grow higher yields, better yields, but at some point breaking crops and livestock apart. And then to keep livestock, we had to, instead of grazing and using pastures and coops and all that with cities, well, one thing about America that we're great at is getting efficient and commercializing, right? So now we're creating these commercial animal feedlot operations, CAFOs. And so now we're taking 1 million birds and sticking them on one site, right? What happens when we get the bird flu? Well, millions of birds die. And when you have the stocking density, disease becomes a huge problem. But one of the other problems that you begin to have is you have a geography, a very tight geography where you can apply all this manure. You're hauling all these nutrients in, right? You're hauling alfalfa, you're hauling corn, DDGs, all these feedstocks for these animals to this site. But you're only exporting, especially with liquid manure, you're only exporting within 3 miles of that site. And so you're doing a lot of land application year over year over year, and you begin to affect the soil. And so now we've got these two halves that are almost like this. They're back to back, not talking. And what we're trying to do is figure out, how do we take this product, the manure product, and turn it into a fertilizer that can adopt the system we already have cost effectively and begin improving and changing from being yield driven to nutrient driven, because we can't have the nutrient driven conversation on crops until we can fertilize the soil with nutrients, right? I mean, soil, and we can focus on the soil health. So that's kind of the gap that we're trying to accomplish with manure, is really closing back up that crop livestock circle. And we realize there's a market for all this meat, for all these eggs that are grown in that way, right? There's people who, maybe there's single moms out there who just need the cheapest eggs on the shelf, right? And it's a great thing that she can buy them for cheap. And I'm not here to take that away, as much as how can we start measuring the quality of all the food that we're raising? And where does it start from? I think for too long we've been focused on what the downsides or the risks of manure are, and we've been focused on the most dollars, or measuring it by just dollars going out the door, but not measuring what the return on investment is, and getting an accurate understanding that, hey, just because I paid $250 an acre this year, I don't have to put anything on for the next year, and I will also get a yield bump. And maybe a start is, if you got a big field, put it on half. Do your own tests. We tell everybody, like, you need to be the expert, the subject matter expert of your operation. You are in charge of managing it, and our job is to provide you value. If we come in and we don't make your lives easier, we didn't do our job. If we didn't have a better crop, if something wasn't different, then there's no value to us doing what we're doing for you. And, we believe in what we're doing with what manure is, and it's been the oldest fertilizer that there's ever been, and it's been around for a long time, and we're getting much better at proving what the value is and learning. So we'd encourage everybody just to get soil samples, know what's going on in your dirt, watch what happens when we apply this, get your yield records out, compare them, see what changed. If you're really into it, get some sap tests year over year, see what changed. Because if you don't start getting the data for your ground, how do you improve? There's so many variables in farming, and weather is probably the largest one. Simply put, our corn grows based on the temperature growing degree units, right? And the soil biology, metabolism goes up and down with the heat. And so not only rain, but temperature is going to have a lot of control and effect on what the yield could be. And if we can start watching what we're putting in, what we're getting out, and collecting data samples year over year, we're going to have a great chance at figuring out better and better what's working and what's not.